It is just heartbreaking.
Coming up on Frontiers, Anchorage's battle to hold the line on crime.
What we're seeing is not only victimization of our officers, but victimization of our community as a whole.
How the seeds of a police shooting in downtown Anchorage were planted long ago.
It's not just one village, it's everywhere.
Also ahead, worries about heroin and how fast it's taken root in some of Alaska's smallest and most vulnerable communities.
Alaska, where there are old triumphs, but also new frontiers, with challenges as great as the state itself, but a belief the best is yet to come, bringing you the faces, the places, and the spirit of the last frontier. This is Frontiers with Rhonda McBride.
Welcome to Frontiers. Crime dominated the headlines in Anchorage this week. On Tuesday, the city had its 29th homicide of the year. Police say a man shot and killed an auto mechanic at an Anchorage car dealership. This latest killing ties the record for the most homicides in a year, set back in 1995. Well, this came on the heels of a shooting downtown early Saturday morning that killed one man and left a police officer wounded. When the Anchorage police officer was shot, still in the backdrop, the recent death of a Fairbanks police officer, fired upon as he worked his shift. Sergeant Alan Brandt initially survived and was well enough to talk about how he told his family he had a premonition he would get shot that night.
Can you imagine telling your kids before you go to work that you're going to get shot? Well, that's what our police officers deal with every day. And I'm not complaining, but I just want you to know what it's like in the life of a police officer.
Brandt later died in surgery after complications from the shooting.
May his sacrifice challenge us deeply and spur us to action.
The Anchorage shooting was similar to the Fairbanks one. Both officers were fired upon multiple times.
We're seeing this across our state. We're seeing this across our nation.
But the Anchorage officer survived. On Thursday, police released this video of Officer Arn Salau from his hospital bed.
I want to let everybody know that I am doing very well and appreciate all the support that we've received, and all that has been very important to my recovery, and I can't do it without you, Anchorage.
A lot has happened since Officer Salau was wounded. Police have learned more about the suspect, James Ritchie, who died in the downtown shootout. Police revealed the handgun he fired, the same model as this one, was used in 5 other murders this year. More investigation is needed to find out if Ritchie was the killer in all of those cases, but the news fits into a pattern of violence that has rocked Anchorage this year.
We truly feel your pain.
Well, people are dying. They're being murdered in our neighborhoods. Okay, so feel the pain is great. We need officers.
From gunfights across town to burglaries and robberies, Anchorage police officers go from call to call on a daily basis with no time to prevent crime. Can you explain what the broken windows theory is?
Well, it's a theory that's been around in law enforcement for decades. If you have a vacant building and someone throws a rock through a window and it doesn't get fixed, nobody deals with it, next thing you know, somebody else will come by and say, I think I'll throw a rock through that window. And someone else, or maybe the same person comes back and does it again. And pretty soon, things degrade.
Ken Spadafora served for 38 years on the Anchorage police force, worked for 9 different mayors, and has seen Alaska's roller coaster cycle of crime, which appears to spike after the number of sworn officers drops, or when specialty officers like detectives get cut.
If we don't keep a good balance between detectives and patrol, we'll get out of whack.
So what happens when the balance gets out of whack? Say you don't have enough detectives or specialty officers investigating gangs or drugs.
Get back to the broken window theory. If we're not catching some of these people that start breaking into houses early on, if we don't stop a 14 or 15-year-old bully that goes around beating people, robbing them of their lunch money, taking their iPhone away from them, by the time they're 18, 19, and 20, they're sticking guns in people's face and doing the same thing.
This year was probably one of the best years and one of the best teams ever here in Alaska. That's him, that's me, and he was the other big guy.
The other big guy, James Ritchie, at the center of the Anchorage police officer shooting and possibly 5 murders.
Totally strange. And to see a photo with me standing right next to the criminal is the craziness.
Tolley played football with Ritchie and basketball on a team that included Trajan Langdon, who went on to play for the NBA. Tolley says nothing in Ritchie's behavior suggested he would take such a dark path. But Ritchie had many brushes with the law since high school: drugs, attempted burglary. Once he wrote a letter to a judge asking for a second chance. "I lay in bed every night thinking about how I've ruined my life. Then I sit up crying, wishing I could go back to high school."
We would beat up on teams, 20, 30, 40 points.
Tolley can't help but wonder what might have been.
Maybe if he would have had the opportunity to go to college or do some other options, then that probably would have opened up to where this wouldn't have been what we're dealing with now.
One of the other quirks of fate, Arn Salau and James Ritchie were students at East High at the same time.
The officer was, I believe, a freshman or sophomore when I was a junior, senior.
A realization that brought home the broken window theory of crime.
I think the window has been shattered.
We're in a totally reactive mode when we get down low in the numbers, and that means we fall behind.
Spadafora says in the reactive mode, police lose touch with the community.
Citizens have to feel comfortable. And it gets back to winning hearts and minds. You know, we have to keep that trust of the citizens, and you can't do it if you just totally robotic police force, where you just go out, collect the facts, turn around, and leave. Out of all the things I've heard of in my career, one of them that still stands true is protect and serve.
But to protect always has to be the priority.
First thing we have to do is keep the peace. We draw that blue line between us and the criminal element in society, and we hold that line.
Next week, for the first time in a long time, the Anchorage Police Department will resume foot patrols downtown. Still ahead, cycles of crime. We'll talk with Rick Meistrom, the former mayor of Anchorage, and Senator Bill Wielechowski about how past decisions affect public safety today. With money approved by the Anchorage Assembly, Mayor Ethan Berkowitz plans to add about 50 new officers as well as 3 police academies. The Police Officers Union says this is welcome news.
Our commitment as officers with the Anchorage Police Department is to use those resources wisely and do the very best we can to make Anchorage safer, and we're definitely headed in a better direction.
The department will get about a $3 million boost in funding. The union believes that it will help put a dent in the crime rate. And joining us to get some historical as well as legislative perspective, the former mayor of Anchorage, Rick Meistrom, and Senator Bill Wielechowski. And crime has been one of your focuses on the Judiciary Committee. Let's just start off talking about the events of this past week. What kind of story does that tell?
Well, I think that the past week has really gotten a lot of people's attention and generated a lot of fears. When you have that much crime that can be associated with one person and that many murders that can be associated with one person, it just says that people are concerned, though they're pleased that maybe this will stop now, or at least it will stop because this one person may have been responsible for 5 murders.
I think there's a tremendous sense of relief in the community. People have been concerned that there's a serial killer loose in Anchorage, and hopefully we've discovered what the root cause of at least 5 of these murders was.
But when we look at these homicide rates, you know, we see them just gradually building up. And of course, there was a spike back in 1995 where the record was set, and we're now tied with that record. Is there any correlation between police staffing and the homicide rate, do you think?
You know, I think you have to be careful because there can certainly be years where you have blips, and
Like a serial killer that
absolutely
gets five victims.
But I do think if you look at the crime rates in general, there has certainly been an uptick in crime in the last couple of years. And I think there is a correlation between the number of police officers and the increase in crime. In fact, if you look, we've gone from 384 police officers back in January of 2010 to 319 in January of 2015. So a pretty significant drop. A city of our size should have about 450 police officers. And these police officers are in reactive mode. They're going from one event to another event to another event. They simply have no time to dig in and investigate, do the detective work that's needed to solve a lot of these crimes.
Now, did Ken Spadafora's broken window theory of crime resonate with you? Because I know when you were mayor, you really emphasized graffiti, getting rid of it as soon as it appeared.
You know, it really did. That was the part, and we got rid of 9,000 junk cars, and we got rid of graffiti for all practical purposes. We said, when it's up, we'll get it down in 24 hours. And it gives a sense of somebody's in control of the city. Somebody is in charge. But when graffiti is around, when there's junk cars around, when there's rundown areas around, it sort of welcomes the people who want to try some crime because they think they can't even correct this. Let's just go ahead and give it a try. So it does. But even more important, though, I think, is the number of officers out there. But you've got to clean up the city, but you've got to have a number of officers and have them used correctly. And that makes a big difference.
Well, you know, it's kind of interesting that you will see cycles of officers being cut, being built back up. Is there kind of a delay factor in seeing the benefits of building back up, and then we decide that, oh, okay, it's taken care of, we can scale back because our funding has been cut?
You know, I think there definitely is. And when we were just looking at those figures for murders, that was my first year in office. That was that other 1995, that record number of murders. Obviously, I was elected and took office in July of that year, and by November of that year, December of that year, we had that big number. But we gradually brought it down, and my goal was to reduce crime by 50%, and we reduced it by 43%, but it took a lot of work every day. Every day we had to think about making the city safer. So there is a delayed factor. And we did hire a lot more officers too. We had about 40, well, we had 80 more by the time I left office than we had when I took office.
Now, one of the things that Mayor Dan Sullivan has said, and we asked him for an interview, but he declined, but he did say that simply police officers cost more as time goes on, and so you can't afford as many.
Well, the job of the mayor and the assembly is to weigh the cost and benefits of different groups, and so I can't judge, you know, that cost and benefit, but I can tell you that more officers and officers used well, and foot patrol, like the mayor is doing now, and I hope he does bike patrols this summer, can make a lot of difference. That just the presence of police officers cuts back in crime.
Do you believe that these reductions sort of plant seeds for the future of crime?
No doubt about it, no doubt about it. And what happens is, I think the criminals become emboldened when the people who are out there, and I think there is a very small percentage of people who are committing crimes over and over again. And what happens is when they realize that they are not, the police simply can't respond to the thefts and the larcenies and the robberies, instead they're responding to much more serious crimes, they become emboldened. And they realize, hey, if I go ahead and commit this theft, police probably won't even show up, or if they do, it'll be days or weeks later.
Well, this is kind of connected to staffing, but let's take a look at the number of police academies that we've had in recent years. And you can actually see some troughs there where we didn't have any at all. Any connection to crime there?
Again, if you look at the numbers, we've seen the crime numbers uptick in the last few years, and so I think there's absolutely a correlation there.
You know, it is tough to get new officers hired and get officers into the academies, because we have some high standards. We've got a good police department, we've got a highly educated police department, and we've got a lot of standards that they can't have any history of drug use or anything like that in their past, even when they were kids. At least we used to, and I don't know if we still do, but it's tough to fill academies. But you've got to do it, and we've got a good police force. More people would be better. The foot patrol and bike patrols are going to help. I think all of those things will help bring crime down.
But what do we do in the long term? Because, so we see this boost, but if we look at the cycle over, the past couple of decades, we see this roller coaster. What do you think we should do? And of course, we've got a state budget crisis that hasn't been resolved. So many challenges, more than ever.
Well, this is sort of a mayor's issue in terms of Anchorage crime right now, which is what we're talking about. And I think every time we have a mayor's election, the number one focus should be crime, at least if that's what people are feeling. And they should, there should be questions coming to candidates for mayor. There should be issues saying, what are you going to do about making our city safer? Are you going to put together a plan for crime? Are you going to get the FBI, the drug enforcement, federal drug enforcement, and the state troopers involved in cooperating? So you need to do it at the election level, when somebody's been elected.
Certainly the police staffing numbers are huge. They're very important. But you've also got to look at the problem of crime holistically and recognize that 90% of all the crimes that are committed in the state of Alaska are drug or alcohol related. And if you're not treating people, if you're not trying to rehabilitate people, the same broken window theory applies to the individuals, because what will happen is individuals will commit minor crimes and get away with it or get mildly punished for it. And then those people sometimes go on and commit greater crimes. And so the drug and alcohol problem is a huge, enormous problem in the state of Alaska that needs to be dealt with.
One of the things that Mao Tosi said when we talked with him is he believes that volunteerism is down and that the actual boots on the ground community support has fallen off. And that makes a difference.
I think it does make a difference. And if you look at the community patrols in East Anchorage, we had a time where we had a Northeast Community Patrol, a Nunaka Valley Community Patrol, and a Russian Jack Community Patrol. And now we've lost a lot of those members. And in fact, when the Nunaka Valley Northeast Community Patrols first started up, we had about 30 people who were actively involved. And that was the last time that crime spiked in the 90s. What we're seeing now is the community responding. The police can't solve, the police simply can't be everywhere. And so it's just good to have people looking out after their neighbors. It's good to have people getting out there in the community and driving around and just looking at what's going on, because the police simply can't be everywhere.
I think that's a really good point, Bill. And I think that and that's maybe a message to the mayor. What Mayor Berkowitz could be doing right now is saying, okay, how can we get the people of Anchorage involved in this? People of Anchorage, I've learned they don't really buy into solutions until they buy into the problem. And I think they've bought into the problem of crime right now. And I think the mayor, if he could put together a lot of folks that were involved in patrol, whether community patrol or doing what they can do to make the city safer, I think people would be willing to be involved. And I think that would be a good help for the city.
Well, we're just about out of time, so I'll give you the last word. What is it that you learned from your time as mayor that you could pass on to us now, if you could boil it down?
I learned as mayor that one of the things you need to do is get people feeling they're part of the city. And we did that through bridge builders. We got all the minorities feeling for the first time they were part of the city. And that's real important. The people are willing to help. They need to be asked to help. They want to help. There's people out there that say, I want to do something. And so the mayor needs to come up with some idea to ask people to help, because they're willing to help. And
all right, well, obviously we could talk much more on this, but I want to thank you both for giving us your insights. Well, still to come, crime on a different battlefront.
In the past, people ignored the fact that there was heroin in the community and there was nothing done about it.
Leaders from across our state voice their fears about heroin and why there are no easy answers. State funding, water and sewer projects, some of the perennial issues at the Alaska Municipal League Conference. But the rapid spread of heroin in rural Alaska is on everyone's mind.
It's devastating, it's hurtful.
The head of the state troopers told the crowd heroin has been found in almost every coastal community in the state, and that drug dealers often use proceeds from marijuana sales to buy heroin to double their profits. This fall in Southwest Alaska, one young woman in Quinnahock died from heroin use. Several others in the community also overdosed on the drug but survived.
It's so serious that it makes me feel like we're failing. We've failed somewhere, and it's time to fix that failing problem.
The main need, resources to educate communities about how deadly this drug is. And then there's the state's fiscal crisis and its impact on public safety. Although most of those at this conference are from rural Alaska, they worry about Anchorage.
It's a scary thought to even know that. I never thought of the day that I would be scared of Anchorage or coming to Anchorage. Now I hear more people talking about it, say we have to take care of each other.
It's a huge strain on the communities because the municipalities have to step up when the state doesn't step in.
In Dillingham, we see a big turnover of the police department, and we get a couple of years with an officer, and then they transfer over to somewhere else.
Although it's been more than 2 years, Interior Alaska continues to pick up the pieces from a tragedy in Tanana, in which 2 state troopers were killed in the line of duty. The city of North Pole has created a memorial park to honor Trooper Gabe Rich and Sergeant Scott Johnson. Nathaniel Kangas was recently convicted for shooting and killing the 2 as they tried to arrest his father in 2014. Many have contributed to the memorial. The Alaska Police Officers Association Farthest North Chapter donated money from the Fallen Officer Fund for the new archway. The park will be dedicated on May 1st, the 3-year anniversary of the trooper's death. And it will also honor those who have died in service to their community, state, or country, as well as first responders and veterans. Grief is still fresh for the Fairbanks police officer who was shot 6 times as he responded to gunfire a few blocks away from his station. Sergeant Alan Brandt died unexpectedly in Anchorage last month after complications from surgery to remove shrapnel from his eye. On his journey home to Fairbanks, many in Anchorage line the streets to show they care. So we leave you now with photojournalist John Thane's tribute to a man who gave his life to hold the line on crime.
It's very overwhelming to see the community coming out to send off a fallen hero.
It's to stand in support of the family and to let them know they're not alone, that Anchorage is here for them.
I understand there was over 130 vehicles in the procession as we drove down the streets of Anchorage.
Sergeant Alan Brandt was a father of 4. I have 4 children. I related to that.
The support that the people of Anchorage offered along the way of the procession was profound and incredibly emotional to see, not just for myself, but for a lot of the officers who participated.
Breathtaking to see the citizens out there, their hands on their hearts, lowering the flag and paying their respect and condolences.
To be able to watch the collective grief and sympathy that the Anchorage community has really showed us how interconnected we are, even though we live miles apart, connected by one lonely road.
And they support us every day, our police and our firefighters, and we want to do the same for them. And whether they're in our city or a part of our state, they are important to us.
We are really sad for Fairbanks. Very grateful that we were able to support them while we were here.
To watch the grief and the collective sympathy of the Anchorage community extended to one of our officers who no one here knew. He didn't serve in your community, but it was a representation of how you feel about public safety, about your own Anchorage Police Department, about all of us. All these officers who are right now going out and doing the exact same things that Sergeant Brandt was doing when unfortunately he lost his life.
Even though the patches are different and the badges are slightly different, we're still brothers and sisters in blue.